Today we are going to learn about making inferences. Now I told you in this past week that making an inference means that you're making an educated guess. In order to make it educated, it says right here you have to use clues to figure something out. So the answer to your question is not stated in the text, but if I look back in the text for those clues, then I can make that educated guess or that inference. So in order to make an inference, you need to read for clues. Think about what you know. Make connections. What have you learned from this? What does this remind you of? If there's a story I read before that was like this, that's what you know. And then figure out what makes sense. Does my inference go with the clues that are in the book? So things you say would be, I can tell this because of this. It sounds an awful lot like race. I know this because on page blank it says this. I can infer this because on page blank it says this. So race and making inferences kind of go together. Okay? In this case, we are going to look at, and let me make this just a little bit bigger so we can read it. We are going to look at this story. Okay? And we are going to make inferences from this story. You can see on the side here that it says, what clues can you gather about Frank? What clues did they give you about the character? What do you know about the character? What clues can you gather about Frank's day? So what do you know about what he did? What clues can you gather about the event that happened this day? So what happened? What clues tell you about what happened? And what do you think happened to Frank? That's where the inference comes in. That's the question you want to answer. What do you think happened to Frank? Well, let's find out. Frank dragged himself down the street. He couldn't wait to get all the way home. It had been the worst day of his life. As he walked, the people walking in the other direction gave him funny looks. He considered this and realized he must look pretty strange. His face was covered in soot, and his clothes were singed, with little holes burned and tattered around the edges. He'd even lost one of his shoes. So what clues can I gather about Frank? I'm thinking of this question as I'm reading, and I kind of want to go and I want to highlight. So I'm going to use the highlighter, and I'm going to pick whichever color I want for this first one. So I'm going to highlight this in yellow, and that way it matches what I highlighted here. Okay, so we know that his face was covered in soot, his clothes were singed, and the little holes burned and tattered around the edges, and he was even missing a shoe. Those are clues that I know about Frank. Okay, another clue is that he dragged himself down the street. Usually when you drag yourself somewhere, you're not going very fast. Okay? So let's take a look at this next one. And remember, we're talking about Frank's day. So what clues can we get about Frank's day? It had started out like an ordinary day. Oh, they're actually going to talk about his day. So I'm going to get a different color highlighter. I'm going to use green in this case. Okay, and I can take notes this way. And remember, once you read the story through, you can go back into the text to find answers to these. But I'm going to read the story and I'm going to highlight things about Frank's day. It started out like an ordinary day. If only he'd taken his normal route to work. Why did he have to walk by the toothpick factory? Today of all days. That was the last time he'd ever go down Burham Street. So he went down Burham Street. And he wouldn't take that risk ever again. So something sounds like something might have happened. I noticed he went down Burham Street. I wonder what happened when he walked by the toothpick factory. What happened? Okay? Remember, you're writing down things you notice and things you wonder, and that helps you make the inference. So, what clues can you gather about the event that happened? Well, let's find out the event. We have the event that happened this day. I'm going to make it in pink. As he walked past the Shanahan's house, he could hear the TV blasting the nightly news. Well, Ted, it was all thanks to one local man. The flames were barely starting to creep through the windows when he arrived like Superman. I noticed that there was a fire, but I also remember that his clothes were singed. So I wonder if those two clues can help me figure out what happened. Unfortunately, he didn't stay long enough to give his name. All we have is an item of clothing. An item of clothing he left behind. Let's highlight that. So that happened at the event. Probably as he climbed out the window after saving the building. So he climbed out the window after saving the building. Back to you at the studio, Ted. The Shanahans began discussing the program. Wow, did you hear that? Right in our own neighborhood. So let's figure out what we think happened to Frank. Frank rolled his eyes and realized he'd never called his boss at work to explain why he didn't come in this morning. So he didn't come in this morning. He hoped his boss would forgive him once he found out the day he had. Climbing the steps in front of his house, he warily turned the doorknob. Warily, that's one of those clues that we know. Warily turn the doorknob. How would you feel after a long day like that? Probably tired. Okay, so as he warily turned the doorknob and opened the door, he called to his wife, "Sarah, you'll never believe what happened to me today." So we need to figure out what we think happened to Frank based on all these clues. There's a lot of clues. We can make the inference. So these are the things I noticed. He dragged himself down the street. His face is covered in soot and his clothes were singed, with little holes burned and tattered around the edges. He'd even lost a shoe. Okay, some other things I noticed. He walked by the toothpick factory. He'd never gone down Burnham Street, and he wouldn't do it again. What happened on Burnham Street? What happened? Okay, that's the question that I wonder. What happened on that street? Well, I noticed that later on it says there were flames that were creeping through the windows, and some guy came in and saved the day, like Superman. I know Superman saves the day, so he arrived like Superman. He left an item of clothing behind. I noticed that he left an item of clothing behind. Well, I can make the connection. He's missing a shoe. Okay? He climbed out of the window after saving the building from ruin. Okay, so he saved the building. Well, when we come down here, it explains why he didn't come in this morning to his boss. But he's sure that he'll be okay once he explains. And he also was tired when he went to tell his wife what happened. So we have all of these clues from the text that I highlighted and what I already know about this. So we can put that right in here. So we know, let me make my text box bigger. We know he was burned clothing, lost a shoe, tired, missed work. We know there was a burning building. He's covered in soot. He's covered in soot. If you don't remember those clues, then go back in the story and find them and then put them in. So what do I already know about this? Well, I know a building, almost burned down. I know, and I can see that I misspelled that, so I'm going to fix it. I also know, what do I already know about this? He was covered in ashes, so I know that. I know that if you run into a burning building, you will get dirty. Also, if you run into a burning building to save the day, you are a hero. So I know these things. These are things that I know, okay? And then you start writing your response about what happened. You use the sentence starters to help you write your response. I'm going to put this down here so that I can write. And I'm going to pick one of my sentence starter, okay? I infer that Frank was the man that ran into the burning building. I know this because, doesn't that sound an awful lot like race? I know this because it says in paragraph, let's go on, it says in paragraph 3 that all we have is an item of clothing he left behind. In paragraph 3, all we have is an item of clothing he left behind. Period, end quote. Notice that I put this in quotes. Let me make this just a little bit bigger so that you can read it a little bit better. Okay, so all we have is an item of clothing left behind. He left this behind because he was the man that ran into the toothpick factory to save the building. It said there was a man on the news that saved a building. Let me see if I can fix this one more time. Okay, and the last thing I want to say is Frank was, this is things I know, what I noticed. Frank was covered in soot, burned and singed, and he was missing a shoe. Okay, this is my inference. So my answer to what happened to Frank is an educated guess based on what I read. Use the text to find those clues. Use those clues from the text to tell me what happened in the text.